Hello and welcome to Denton's Tales. This this is a special video, you could say. In fact, as we would say here in Ireland, for the day that's in it. Yes, and the day that's in it is the 1st of May, which is BELTANE, or BELTANE in Irish, or at least in Connacht Irish. For those not familiar with Ireland, Irish Gaelic varies slightly from province to province. You have Ulster Irish, Munster Irish, etc., and that is the way it's pronounced in Connacht. Beltane is the ancient Gaelic May Day festival. It was one of four very important festivals in Celtic Ireland, dating back into the mists of time, centuries before Vikings and Normans arrived in Ireland. And it's mentioned in the earliest written literature in this country. Traditionally, it begins at sunset on April the 30th, and it ends at sunset on May the 1st. Considered the height of spring and the beginning of the summer, it was a very, very important time, lying between the spring equinox and the summer solstice, and also referred to as the first of summer in the early texts. It was also widely celebrated, of course, in other Celtic lands, such as Scotland and the Isle of Man in Wales, and it all has connections, in fact, to Celtic cultures right across Europe, including ancient Gaul. As I said, there were four major Gaelic festivals, predating the coming of Christianity by centuries. There was Samhain on the 1st of November, Imbolc on the 1st of February, Beltane on the 1st of May, and Lunasa on the 1st of August. Beltane marked the start of the pastoral season, you could say, when livestock were driven out from pens and enclosures and barns out into the summer pastures, there to enjoy the grass and the sun and all the joys of the coming summer. And various magic rituals will be held to protect them from harm, both from the natural hazards that they could be exposed to and, even more importantly, in those highly superstitious times, from the supernatural ones. Oh yes, the supernatural ones were especially feared, and they would want to guard against fairies and spirits, and this would often take the form of a symbolic fire ceremony. Now you see, Beltane is a fire festival. It's associated with the sun and its warmth, and seen by some scholars as coming from the worship of Belanus, or Bel, an ancient Celtic god whose name meant something like the bright one or the shining one, sometimes seen as meaning bright fire. But though some scholars now question that and suggest the name actually meant strong or powerful. And he seems to have been well known across the Celtic world, with over 50 inscriptions that mention him in various Celtic lands. And that widespread mention of his name would suggest a common Celtic origin. He is seen as a sun god, a Celtic equivalent of Apollo, if you like. He even pops up in Roman inscriptions, one of them by the Emperor Diocletian. Now, traditionally, bonfires were lit to honour the sun and Bel as its representative, to honour the sun's light and the warmth that nurtured the world. But these fires were very special. And in order to show how special they were, other fires would be put out. Fires in the hearth, in forges, etc. Any fire already lit would be extinguished, and then a special Beltane fire was lit, often a great public event called the Need Fire. And people would jump over it when it was low enough for them to do so, to purify themselves, to bring fertility and good luck and all that sort of thing. And couples even jumped over the fire together, hand in hand, to re-pledge themselves to each other. Now, others are skeptical of the god idea, suggesting that in fact it was simply a festival in honour of the sun, and the meaning bright fire, well, that simply referred to the sun itself without any dedication to the ancient Celtic god. But there isn't really sufficient evidence either way, to be sure. There was an Apollo-like Celtic god with variations of his name as Belanus, Belus, Belanus, and in Britain and Ireland as Bel. I mean, we know that. So it is possible it could be either way. As I say, you can't really actually prove either one. The first known document to actually mention Beltane was supposedly written by an Irish bishop in the late 9th century. The full Druidic aspects of the celebrations did not survive the advent of Christianity, of course, but most of the celebrations themselves that had started centuries before, they continued. Christians were celebrating the old traditions, I suppose, because, well, they were fun and enjoyable in themselves, though the pagan associations were ignored or linked to Christian concepts, which was quite common in early Ireland, where holy wells or sacred groves or whatever would be given a Christian association, and the sort of the worship of them would continue, but in a different form. Now, there were shamanic rituals to protect crops and encourage growth, to keep dairy produce safe and fresh, and, of course, to protect people too. Spirits and other entities were thought to be especially active at both Beltane, the start of the summer, and at Samhain, the start of the winter, the season opposites, if you like. And these would have been the most important of the four great Gaelic festivals, given their placement during the year. Sir James George Fraser wrote in his very interesting book, The Golden Bough, which I remember, incidentally, my mother was very fond of. She used to quote it quite a bit. He wrote that those two festivals would have been of not particularly great interest to crop growers, but would have been of very great interest indeed to herdsmen, indicating that the halving of the year at the 1st of May and the 1st of November must date from a time when the Celts were primarily a pastoral people, which would have been very largely dependent on their herds of various animals. I suppose that does make perfect sense. The early Irish texts have accounts of the fire rituals performed by the Druids to protect cattle from harm. And two great fires would be lit, great big massive fires. And they were lit along with what were called great incantations. And then the cattle would be driven between the fires. Yes, now, if you ever actually try driving cattle, or most animals for that matter, towards a fire, and especially between two fires, very large fires, well, I wish you luck. Just make sure your insurance policy covers stampede by animals. Whether it worked or not, I really don't know, but it must have done something, I suppose. I mean, would they have, gone on constantly doing something that never actually worked? One would assume they would have stopped if it didn't. I can imagine. Did you protect your cattle, Connor? I did that, Oisin. Oh, the Druids did all that incanted stuff. And a powerful bit of incanting it was, surely. Oh, they incanted away like nobody's business. And then we lit the biggest fires you ever saw in your life. Oh, massive fires there were. They lit up the whole place. No, we had a bit of a job, so we had to get the animals to go near them at all, let alone go in between them, but we got them through. We got them through with a bit of kicking and shoving, like. That's grand. So they're all safe now, so they are. Well, no, I wouldn't quite say that. I mean, no harm's going to come to them now, that's sure enough. Sure, didn't they all get sick and die after? Oh, sorry I'm to hear that. Maybe the fires weren't big enough, or the incanting wasn't incanted enough. Aye, or maybe the whole thing's a load of shite. Yes. Anyway, one thing is certain regarding fire ceremony. There is plenty of actual evidence for rituals involving fire. Archaeological excavations during the last century discovered considerable evidence of very large fires and charred bones at sites that would have been considered of great magical significance in Celtic times. So we have both archaeological evidence and written documentation of fire ceremonies. As late as the 19th century, old customs from Celtic times still persisted, often wrapped up in more Christian slants, but still they were old customs, such as white or yellow flowers, primrose, marsh marigold, rowan, hazel, hawthorn and gorse, for example, which would be placed at doorways and in windows, both in Ireland and Scotland and the Isle of Man. The flowers would be made into garlands or into bouquets, or simply be scattered around the house at random. Sometimes they would be attached to equipment that was used for milking, for the making of butter and cheese, even hung on the milk cows themselves to keep everything nice and safe, to prevent any harm from, malignant spirits that might try to harm these things. Small trees, such as, well, the hawthorn, the holly, the rowan, sycamore, these would be decorated with ribbons and flowers, which was known as the May bush. And that was a practice that lasted right down to the end of the 19th century, probably a bit over into the 20th century as well. Holy wells. Now, holy wells were, and still are, a very prominent feature of the Irish landscape. You can hardly throw a rock in any direction in Ireland without hitting a holy well. We have over 3,000 of them. Many, if in fact most, dating back long before Christianity, back to the Celtic times, but becoming Christian holy wells later on. They simply changed the religion, but the wells themselves remained there. And these would have been visited at Beltane, as well as Imbolc and Lunacer, but particularly at Beltane. The visitors praying as they moved around the well, moving with the sun from east to west, and leaving various offerings behind them afterwards. Now, young women would go out on the morning of Beltane, and they would roll in the dew. Oh yes, they would roll in the Beltane dew, since Beltane dew was considered a source of good luck and health, and it would even be collected and used later for washing, giving, it was said, youthfulness and sexual attractiveness. Oh yes. Now, I've no idea if it actually did those things, or it simply produced chills and coughs from too much rolling around in wet grass. But, it wasn't just women. No, it wasn't just women who could benefit from Beltane. Oh, no. Men who washed their faces on Beltane, with or without dew apparently, they would grow long, luxuriant whiskers. Yes, they were. In the famous words of Michael Caine, not a lot of people know that. Probably not a lot of people are particularly interested in knowing it either. But anyway, I just throw it out there. Many Beltane practices were specifically designed to ward off the unwanted attention of the fairies, of spirits, preventing them from either stealing or spoiling dairy products, for example. Now, dairy products were of very great concern in those days. One of these was the Gaelic, a well-known figure from Irish folklore, seen as a veiled old hag with only one eye. And her skin is deathly pale, her teeth were red. And this creature was able to create storms and to leap across mountains that she herself had created with her hammer. Though, quite how an old woman who might be seen as a hag was able to perform such amazing acrobatic feats is somewhat hard to understand, but she did. And she was particularly active around Beltane, and she'd come looking to cause mischief of various kinds. Now, there were ways to guard against her, to be sure. For example, you could use the water from a holy well to bless the herd and ask for divine protection. And of course, given the 3,000 plus holy wells in Ireland, there would probably be one somewhere close by, certainly within a reasonable distance. One could decorate the cattle themselves with those flowers associated with the May Day celebrations, primroses, marigolds, and buttercups. And always take the herd out of the fields and into the shelter of a barn, preferably a barn that has been well sprinkled with water from a holy well, and do it before midday on Beltane. Oh yes, so with your cattle suitably decorated with flowers, safely out of the field and liberally sprinkled with the water from a holy well, you might thumb your nose at the Gaelic. There's the thing now. So, on the one hand, you drive your flocks out to pasture at Beltane, suitably shamanically protected against all harm, and on the other hand, you took them in again before midday to keep them safe from the old hag. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Other fairies and spirits could be held at bay by various means, including putting 3 black coals underneath a butter churn, thus protecting it from the fairies, meaning that they were not able to steal the contents or to make it go sour or anything like that. The use of flowers to decorate the horns of cattle. And food. Food would be left out at the doorstep, or milk poured just in front of the doorstep for the fairies, thus hopefully giving them no reason to go further inside, which certainly would make sense. See, dairy products were seen, of course, as especially at risk from the attentions of harmful spirits, as were crops, reflecting the agricultural nature of life in ancient Ireland, and that is why there was so much emphasis on the protection of cattle, the guarding of milk and butter, of protecting growing crops, and so on. Now, one thing that was done was to have a procession. Now, everybody loves a procession, a family procession around the boundaries of a farm. And they would all carry things like grain and seeds, farm implements, holy well water, and rowan. And they would march all the way around the perimeter of the farm, pausing at the 4 cardinal points of the compass, performing rituals at each one, beginning in the east. And signs could be made using milk. The sign of the cross, for example, in later times would be made using milk, and signs could even be made on the cattle themselves, also using milk. There were very many customs associated with Beltane. Superstitions and wards to keep away bad things, spells, herbs and flowers used as protection, and so forth. And while they have ceased to exist today in the form of what might be termed national religions, which the pagan beliefs of ancient Ireland, of course, were, many of these traditions are carried on today by modern pagan or heathen groups, or Ossetru, or whatever term you wish to use. And Wiccans, of course, use the word Beltane for their May Day celebrations. Flowers were always closely associated with Beltane and still have a place at this time of year. Offerings of flowers on a home altar, for example, or the giving of flowers along with a blessing to others, either in a group or as a one-to-one greeting. Getting a basket, or even making it yourself, giving it that personal touch, and filling it with fresh or indeed manufactured flowers, and using it in the home as a decoration, on an altar, or using it as a gift. There was one old tradition attached to the May basket, where you would sneak around to the home of someone you cared about. You'd put the basket outside their door, you'd knock on the door, and then you'd run. So there's nobody there when they open the door and find the basket, which is an interesting tradition. Now, there is also an intimate aspect of the Beltane celebrations, which is understandable. It was a time where the fertility of the land and everything on it was being honoured. Animals were giving birth, flowers were blooming, eggs were hatching. There was general reproduction in progress all around. And Beltane encompassed a celebration of the fact that life itself cannot exist without sexuality. So some rituals in ancient times would have had a sexual aspect, as many, of course, pagan rituals would. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you rush out and dance naked in the nearest sacred grove you can find, but if you do, you would be following an aspect of the ancient pagan religions, though the weather in Ireland is often not exactly suited to naked frolicking in the woods. You would certainly want to choose the day rather carefully. You could see Beltane as primarily a celebration of fertility, followed by the passion of life, resulting in rebirth and honoured by fire, representing the warmth of the sun, without which life, of course, is impossible. And if that doesn't sound like a good reason to get intimate with someone, well, I don't really know what does. Following on from that, one romantic tradition would be seeing Beltane as the great wedding of the god and the goddess, making it a popular time for hand-fasting ceremonies. It has been suggested that this may have come from hand-fasting taking place at major festivals, which would have been attended by large numbers of people because of a shortage of persons able to perform marriages. I can't really comment on that for one very good reason. I have absolutely no idea if it's true or not. Could well be. Similarly, the maypole, around which people, of course, have danced for a long time on May Day, may have originally been part of the Celtic celebrations, though they were first recorded in that form only in the 14th century. And there's really little evidence as to what the maypole's place actually is historically, though it formed an important place in village life in medieval England, of course. But given the decorating of small trees with ribbons and flowers in Celtic times, it seems very probable that they would have danced around them. You know, in fact, it's almost certain that they did. So it could very well be that is where the dancing around the maypole actually originated. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this little look at the Festival of Beltane, an ancient fire festival that still exists in a very diluted form, of course, far removed from its origins in Celtic Ireland and Scotland and the Celtic lands beyond, but nonetheless with us today as still a living link with the past, which I think is a rather nice way to look at it. So if you want to do something to celebrate the day that's in it, be it with flowers or, going to a well if you happen to have one handy, or being, well, let's just say intimate, why not? Enjoy that link with the past. So for now, I shall say goodbye, and I hope to see you in the next video that I make. Goodbye for now.